Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast. My name is EJ Carrion, and today we have D. Laura O'Neill in the house. Really excited to have you back on the podcast.
I'm happy to be back, EJ. This is really nice. Thank you.
I know. I feel like last time you were on with Nydia, that was actually a high-viewed show. A lot of people loved it. That feels like forever ago, though.
It was quite a few months ago. It feels like a lifetime.
Yeah. And if it comes to correct, now we both are traveling a lot more, or we're traveling a lot more since then.
Yes. I work for a fintech that works really heavily in diaspora communities. And so we've had a lot of activations in New York with community. And so it's been really, really great to be there. Been working a lot with Jamaican diaspora, which I love.
Yeah.
But I am a little tired of the constant traveling.
Yeah. No, leaving to Philadelphia right after this, I swear I've been in Fort Worth for like 15 of the last 60, 75 days. And so I come back to push this through and also see my lovely wife and dog, to make sure they know that I care and I love them. But the grind of being on the road right now, I think you feel it more because of the pandemic. You were home for 2 years, like no traveling really. And then like, now you're like, oh, I'm in New York all this time. Wait, and now you're like, wait, I kind of like being home. So
yeah, it is. It's like, I think we just get used to the grind, and then you have a moment and you realize, like, actually, I don't want to live like that anymore.
Yeah. So, need to figure out that. But you know who's living her best life right now is Mrs. Ann Zeta. Is she out in, like, Australia, New Zealand, sipping tea with koalas or something? She's living her best life.
Hiking out in nature with her family.
Yeah. So, D, obviously we got to hear your awesome story last time, but if you could give, like, a 2-minute pitch on letting people know, new listeners, kind of who you are and like your why you care about Fort Worth, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, of course. I am Fort Worth, pretty much born and raised, a child of immigrants. Grew up on the East Side. I've been a big advocate of the arts community and our transit community. I love Fort Worth. Wrote a little bit for the Fort Worth Weekly, and now I get to participate with EJ occasionally here on the 817 podcast.
Yes. Cool. Well, let's go ahead and dive into a classic 817 story. For those of you who knows how this works, we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth and all of its good, its glamour, but also its problems. And so we do 3 short stories, 1 big story, wins and losses. So we're going to get out of the gate here and just start about the county and what's going on with Tim O'Hare. We have some more shenanigans by Tim and the county leadership. On Wednesday last week, as you listen to this on Monday, County Judge Tim O'Hare held a closed-door meeting to discuss the county's visiting justice of the peace policy. 3 judges alleged they did not receive invites to that meeting. All 3 are Democrats and minorities who represent majority-minority precincts, they say. Those 3 judges, Kenneth Sanders, Sergio De Leon, and Lisa Woodard, are now calling out the county judge for racial discrimination, partisanship, and cronyism, according to a joint statement released Thursday.
It's not surprising, if you're keeping up with what is happening at the county, how things have been since Tim O'Hare took over. In a leadership position, kind of his political background before he came into Tarrant County, this is not a surprise. I think what I am surprised about is maybe that people aren't more alarmed by just this ongoing series of behaviors, right? Like it just seems like every time I listen to the podcast, I hear about Tim O'Hare, and it's always something just really shocking, to be honest. It's like it's so bad and it's happening so often that it's hard not to be like, oh, more Tim O'Hare business, but it's not okay.
I think the media who has access to county leadership, they are writing no stories because he's not giving them quotes, he's not giving them time, and so they're like, oh, well, I can't do a journalistic article about this because pretty much everything will be my opinion, and I can't write that way. So then, like, no one writes about Tim O'Hare, I feel like, in a way that, like, I'm just like, the way New York Times talked about Trump for years, I feel like why are we not doing that with Tim O'Hare right now? Like I feel like people want to know what's going on with this leadership, what's going on at the county. You are paid by subscribers. To me, not making more stories about Tim O'Hare doesn't even seem like it's not a smart civic way to run a newspaper, but then also just like from an economic side, it seems like it would be what people would want for you to actually write about rather than the state fair.
Yeah, it's you know, I think it's hard for journalists, right? Because we all know that newspapers are facing some real tragedies, but also like you only get to write about things like after they happen. That being said, I do think that there is space, especially like in the opinion columns, and for more in-depth analysis about what this means and that this behavior isn't normal. And I read in the article, Tim O'Hare said something like, well, elections have consequences, and pretty much like I'm in charge and you lost and this is what I'm going to do. But something that I think about a lot, and especially with like Anne as your co-host, when she was in the political office, I think she made it a point to say, you represent everyone. Like you're a representative of Tarrant County as a whole, not just the people who voted for you or whoever you have to agree with. And it's really, really sad that he doesn't have that philosophy at all. And I find that very concerning.
Yeah, he gives me a vibe like if this was one, he makes politics as if it's a sporting event. Your team red, your team blue, Republican, Democrat. Oh, us Republicans have scored a touchdown and won the game, so we're going to do a touchdown dance until you win a game and not include you. Like, that's the interpretation. He makes it as if, like, literally, oh, you guys lost, so you just have to deal with the consequences while we celebrate all the things that we think should be across the line of our policies. And I think that's sad. I mean, the quote in this article, there's so much misinformation that the message in it isn't worthy for a response, other than to say it's surprising to see Democrats resort to the same tired playbook. This is a statement from O'Hare that a representative read.
It seems like a really juvenile response, and I guess like it's hard when politicians act this way, right? Because a lot of it is about theatrics and it's a performance. But imagine if like that happened in your workplace. Yeah. And your boss, right, like someone in a leadership position at your job behaved this way, and not only behaved that way, but responded that way, like what that would mean for morale at the company or the success of the company, you'd be a little concerned and might be looking to like switch jobs or workplaces. Yeah. And so what I'd love for people to remember is that like, I don't think politics have to be this way, and it's okay to ask for accountability from them. And I know that he's probably going to be there until the next election cycle, but that's definitely something to write our representatives about and to write his office about, and to pay attention to and tell our friends like, hey, this isn't normal behavior. Yeah.
Yeah. So the other story we also have about county is we are sending more prisoners to Garza. Can you bring that one in?
Yes. So listeners of the podcast and just readers of our local papers might be aware of some of the challenges with the Tarrant County Jail. There have been a lot of deaths, a lot of mismanagement, some really, really egregious human rights violations that have been brought to light thanks to some very excellent reporters and some really amazing activists here in Fort Worth. And now recently, the Tarrant County Commissioners voted on Tuesday to send more inmates from the Tarrant County Jail to a private one in Garza County. The vote will also exempt the county from bidding requirements to seek other facilities. So this isn't necessarily like something that other institutions will be competing for. This is kind of a done deal. Commissioners approved an $18 million agreement in August to send 432 inmates from the Dalby Correctional Facility in Post, 38 miles southeast of Lubbock. The agreement will last until December 1st, and the commissioners reallocated $22.5 million from American Rescue Plan dollars towards the initiative. If this measure had not passed, the county, again, would have risked overcrowding the Tarrant County Jail, which, of course, is dangerous not just to the people that work there, but also to the inmates who are human beings. And then overcrowding at the jail would also jeopardize their jail certification, is what the document said.
Yeah.
EJ, how do you feel about that? What do you think?
I mean, the the American Rescue Plan Act funds that are now going to a for-profit prison. So let's spit that. The money that we are upset about here in Texas, the Bidenomics that has given all this money that we're upset we're spending, is now going to the thing that we love, and that is our cops, and that money is going to a for-profit prison, which means for-profit is they're probably making 60%, 40 to 60% margin on whatever they're providing, holding inmates. And so now this business is going to basically take ARPA dollars and play golf and live on resorts and fly PJs using federal funds. And how does this not fire anyone up in Texas? Like, that is what's happening. Federal dollars go into a for-profit prison who makes a lot of margin and now is going to enjoy their lives pitting prisoners from incarcerating people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The other thing too that the story highlights is just kind of like the very egregious mismanagement of the Tarrant County Jail by the sheriff's office. So originally, like when this transfer of prisoners was proposed, and the article talks about it, is first it was like, well, there's going to be like we're going to redo the HVAC because we have HVAC problems, and you might have caught some stories in the past about like there's no air conditioning in the Tarrant County Jail, right? Like really abysmal conditions for people, especially like in the Texas heat. Or, actually we have a staffing shortage, right? Like we don't have enough people working for the sheriff's department to keep track of all of these prisoners. And now it's like, well, actually it's because of overcrowding. And it's like, how many problems are there in the Tarrant County Jail that we have to outsource this to a private prison? And that they keep asking for more resources and more funds when they have such a track record of mismanagement, to me is really wild.
Yeah. And that we continue to go down this rabbit hole. So that is the county shenanigans piece of the 817 podcast. It seems like we will have to do this weekly to keep it on everyone's minds. You should be upset. We should be more mad at our county judge, and things need to happen. So let's talk about more leadership that's been surprising. And, someone thought that the way the Republicans been running Tarrant County and Fort Worth, they thought it was so good that he decided to become a Republican, and that is Eric Johnson, mayor of Dallas, has in the Wall Street Journal. This was big news and big gossip and conversations all across North Texas, but he has wrote an op-ed saying American cities need Republicans, and I'm becoming one. He will now. Maddie was the mayor of the largest city, Republican mayor of a large city. Now it's Eric Johnson. Basically, the article is in the story, but he writes a piece in the Wall Street Journal just talking about law and order, talking about basically kind of the same rhetoric that you would see from a Tim O'Hare or we even talk about, I even thought it was a little bit more conservative than what Maddie usually says in the media. So I don't know what Dallas is saying on this level, but I also heard his first interview. He did an interview, which is also in the show notes. He did an interview with a conservative radio host, and he gave his claims that he changed because, quote, the quotes were basically, if you believe in law and order, you can't be a Democrat in today's society, which we can have that conversation. But he also basically said that the thing that really made this happen for him was because people were unhappy after George Floyd and defunded police and at his house with his children, and how people acted that made him say, you know what, like this is what I had to do. And he also claims that it has nothing to do about moving to other positions. He also claims that he shouldn't have had to have to do it before he ran for mayor again, because I think he's there to 2027. Because I think Dallas is 4 years and Fort Worth is 2 years mayor. So there's a lot into it. What have you been able to process about the Eric Johnson story in Dallas?
A few things come to mind. The first one is that it's not incredibly surprising. He's been signaling for a long time that he's gotten very, very close to political operations in the Republican Party, right? He's made some appearances. I think he had like Senator John Cornyn participate in a swearing-in ceremony. He's given some appearances on like some right-wing cable news channels. So I think to a lot of folks, it was kind of like, oh, okay, well, I'm glad that you're finally owning this. We know that, or I think we've seen that time and time again, people find that the law and order messaging leads to political wins, especially in conservative places. So that's not surprising. My question, I guess, for the mayor of Dallas would be, where do you stand on everything else that identifying with the Republican Party today looks like? That might not necessarily be in line with like the views of the city of Dallas. I think it's a huge problem that he declared after he won that election. I think Dallas, the city of Dallas, has shown itself again and again to be a progressive city, a liberal city. And so I think actually that there is already a website to recall him, and I'm not surprised by that. And people should ask for accountability from their politicians when that happens, right? Like, you lied to me. This is who you said you were and who you represented. And like, he didn't come to this realization like in the last week, EJ, right? Like, if he's having John Cornyn come and swear him in, and he's been giving appearances on like right-wing media, then this has probably been something that he's been thinking about for a while, and he's misrepresented himself. So good on the people of Dallas for initiating those steps. But yeah, I would love to know like where he stands on everything else that like, you know, the mainstream Republican Party believes in, right? Like what we've seen against diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, spending on public infrastructure, what it looks like for the LGBTQ plus community, right, which is really robust in Dallas, and beyond that. And I really haven't seen any responses about that or how that's going to reconcile beyond his like law and order initiatives.
Yeah. He talked in that in the interview where we heard it directly from him that he truly doesn't think he's done anything wrong, or he doesn't see it the way that I think most people see it, and that is you came in. I know mayors aren't partisan races, and you know you have to pit, you know, you have to tell everyone who you are, but we all know, and if you're looking at people like us who you know, who usually vote for someone because they're a Democrat, I know he had a competitor who was more of the liberal person he ran against, and he got like 93%. I mean, he really did his thing. So his argument is that regardless, I would have won. And he also said that Cornyn or Cruz, he said he didn't talk to anyone about this. He's like, not my mom, not my grandma. You know, he's like, no one else knew this. And so how true is that? I don't know. But I just want to, you know, on his little thing, he talks about how no one knew about this. But my big harp on it is that his logic is everyone wants, like, the defund the police is awful, and y'all came to my house and, you know, scared my kids, and because of that, I now believe I have to be a Republican. That kind of seemed like was his personal story he was saying, and for me, I just say, okay, like, so you're going to join the group of people who wants to protect guns over kids? Like, you want to, like, what about what about Allen Outlet? Did that not make, you know what? Let me join these people, you know, who's like loud, you know, who don't think we should stand up to guns. You know, like, I just feel like he really pit this like, oh, what happened, this horrible thing, what happened in my family's life. This one incident of people mad at me because of they wanted me to defund the police and scared my family. But then when you look at all the things that the right-wing Texas have done to scare families, it just doesn't make sense that the logic is there. Okay, now that means I got to be a Republican. So I just didn't like his logic of why he feels like he needed to become a Republican. Because I do think you could be a law and order Democrat. The old guard is that.
And I also think that, like, by and large, the Democratic Party as a whole is like a center right party.
Yeah.
Like, I think you do have some very progressive people like on the wings, but generally, like, the hierarchy of it is, it's pretty middle of the road.
Exactly.
I don't see like a lot of like major Democratic leaders talking about defund the police movement, like quite the opposite actually. You do see some activism like anywhere on the left that bring that up in discussion. But yeah, like where are you on everything else? Like, where are you on school vouchers? Like, how do you feel about Ken Paxton and the way like the Texas Republican Party has been leading things? And none of that was up for question. And he can say like, nobody knew that the switch was coming. I didn't say anyone, but like he knew, right? EJ, like he knew that he was turning it over like in his head. And I think he owed it to the electorate to be honest about where he was and like what his vision was in a candid way. And the other thing that I think is interesting too is, once again, we're seeing that narrative about how about liberal cities. I thought that was really like that same talking point that I'm seeing on national news about like, wow, the liberal mismanagement of our cities and Texas can do it better. And it's like it's a little too coincidental for me to think that this was a spur of the moment, like, I'm passionate about it, this is where my heart is, and now I'm coming out for this decision. It seems like very coordinated.
Oh yeah. Side part, and then we'll go to the third story. Because economic development will be our big story. Opportunity, education. There's a lot going on. That if you're a parent, if you're someone who's thinking about the future of talent and success in Fort Worth, you're definitely going to want to listen. But from the economic development side of this, what I've heard across North Texas is, he's doing this because he's losing in economic development to the Collin County, the Friscos, the Fort Worths, who are the businesses who are coming here, and they are looking to leave California, leave these places or whatever they're doing to come to a pro-business community. And so if you're not red like Fort Worth or Frisco, you're going to continue to lose and be seen as a liberal city. So he did this for those reasons, because Dallas, but I can see that. But at the end of the day, they're still getting Goldman Sachs is coming to Dallas, building their second headquarters. Like, I don't know how much of that's a true excuse either. Like, I'm doing this because we're getting our butt kicked on economic development. And I don't even know if that's really true.
That sounds to me like a talking point, to be really, really honest. Like, I don't really see how a party switch like does anything for economic development. Like, I don't, even liberals like here in Tarrant County, right? Like, no one's saying like, let's tax people more. Like, we know that property taxes are a really big burden on families. So I just don't put that much stock in it. Like, I don't see how economic development policy really has to do with him declaring as a Republican, in particular. Like, if you look at his donors and who some of his donors are shaping out to be in this last cycle, like, I think there's probably more to it than that. And like, my read, admittedly, like speculatively, is that it seems like he's getting ready to pivot to run for a different office. I'd love to see like if he decides to run for mayor of Dallas again. But to me, it looks like, as a politics person, putting my politics hat on, that it looks like he's readying himself for a different political stage.
Yeah, and I don't know how this gets. Yeah, I mean, obviously, running as a Democrat, you've seen Beto get demolished. You've seen it happen over and over again. But I just don't see how you're still going to have to bring that Democrat with you if you're going to be the most centered Republican on that side. And I don't know if he's laying the framework down properly to do that. I think he's coming off way too. I even made that funny joke. Who'd have thought that Fort Worth would have the most progressive mayor out of Dallas and Fort Worth now? Like, I'm interested to see how he navigates it. And maybe I'll take another assessment of it from a strategic side or whatever. But right now, it's a big loss for Dallas.
Really, yeah, big loss, and really, really different messaging too, right? Between his op-ed and how the city of Fort Worth has positioned similar policies, right? The language around like a clean and safe city versus like, bringing up to fund the police in like a really polarizing way.
Yeah. A lot we could go down that, but we have to keep going and moving to our next story. I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Dee for the third story, which is a story on where we are at Tarrant County's growth with homelessness. Number of homeless families in Tarrant County grows as support funds are depleted or diverted, which we talked about where some funds were going earlier.
So yes, this is an article coming from the Fort Worth Report by Sandra Sadek and Miranda Suarez, a KRA reporter. And essentially, we're seeing just a system under a lot of pressure that's servicing the unhoused population in Tarrant County. About 3,000 people are considered homeless in Tarrant County, according to coalition numbers. And that's a 22% increase from 2020. And so seeing that large increase in such a short period of time has put quite a strain on current resources in Tarrant County, and they're seeing those numbers grow. And Leah King, who's directing this coalition, is letting us know that even though the system is functioning well under this kind of rise in pressure, they're seeing some breaks. More and more people are coming into homelessness. And now the county has less resources than it did in years past. The shelters have been over capacity for more than a year. The Salvation Army's Maybe Social Services Center has been serving people twice to 4 times as many as their normal capacity. They've turned the center's old gym into another unhoused shelter. And basically, it's just there aren't enough resources to keep up with the change in the houseless population in Tarrant County. I think one of the key takeaways too is Lauren King, who's the director of the Tarrant County Homeless Coalition, is pretty much identifying 6 reasons why we're seeing this big surge. And so the first is, post-pandemic, there was during the COVID pandemic, there was an eviction moratorium. So we've seen that come to an end. The end of emergency rental assistance, right? Federal emergency rental assistance was available in 2021, but it was gone by March of 2022. Rent increases, right? So once again, we see this anecdotally in our friend circles. We're seeing this in reporting, just affordability crises in Tarrant County, but it really sounds like kind of the country at large. Increases in evictions. Tarrant County has seen the highest number of evictions since before the pandemic, including 1 week where over 950 evictions were filed. And the shelters are at capacity. And we're seeing at the Tarrant County, right, the judge taking resources away from social services programs and investing them or placing them in more law enforcement initiatives. And it's really curious because I remember seeing this mentioned in another article that when those ARPA funds were used to provide temporary housing, they saw numbers like a 40% decrease in like unhoused populations. And it's like, well, yes, that goes along with like a housing first policies that are heavily advocated by professionals and experts. But instead, we're choosing to pivot to, law and order and enforcement and policing. And are those as effective?
Yeah. No, what sparked in my mind is I'm so thankful that you're on the pod, because I always learn or get different perspectives when you're here, is just thinking of it from the lens of they saw, I felt like Fort Worth leaders were bragging about how crime has went down, but you just list the 5 reasons why this stuff went down. We were helping them. We were helping people. We were assisting people. And now it's going to be very interesting what the rates look like over the summer. Now we're getting out of the summer. All these things start ending. Does crime go up even more now? So it's like you did enough with Biden's money to make you look good as a safe. I'm a safe leader. I created a safe neighborhood. But really how you did that was by taking federal funds to help people. Now you're finally taking those away and said, all right, I've helped people enough. Now let me give this money to the people who fund my campaign out in Garza, Texas. And now we're going to be left with probably more people homeless, right? More people getting evicted, more people committing crimes, and that's just like a crazy vicious circle.
Oh no, and you know, I listened to the episode where you and Ann went over the city budget, and you talked a little bit too about like CCPD funds and like how CCPD funds are being used in programming to address safety, right? We want a clean and safe city again. And it's like, well, we've seen like what public investment looks like in social service programs and the difference that they can make and what it looks like when those funds dry up. And are CCPD programs being used in the same way? Are those funds that should be controlled by the police, right? Like, even if they're in partnership with other organizations, are they the experts that should have the final say? And you're right. Like, it makes me wonder if we see these numbers skyrocket, right? In crime or like lack of safety or houselessness. Is that going to translate into a pitch for, well, actually, we need more resources for policing instead of for social service programs that we know can be effective? And that makes me really, really sad because we haven't, I think, as a city, always answered that call well.
Well, let's go ahead and now hit the big story. The big story, like we mentioned, it's building opportunity equity in Fort Worth. And basically how we define this, is we're about to share a lot of cool economic development stuff happening in Fort Worth, but we're also going to then talk about a lot of education piece and what are we doing to make sure that people who are from Fort Worth and who go to Fort Worth education systems, these black and brown kids are actually going to be able to benefit from these economic opportunities that we're investing in. And so that's pretty much this next kind of big chunk of the episode. And we have a lot of different stories we're going to go through, and they're linked in the description so you can follow along. But we're going to go ahead and dive in first. I think it's best to kind of just dive in first with the economic updates with the biotech companies. So I'm going to start there. This one, it was by Bob Francis, September 30th, in the Fort Worth report. How Fort Worth helped secure North Texas as a top-tier life sciences center. It said that Texas and North Texas took a big step, becoming a top-tier life science center on September 26th, when the area was awarded federal designation to be the customer experience hub for the Advanced Research Project Agency for Health. The designation will bring federal funds, programs, and attract talent to the area's growing biotech and life sciences industries. The two other hubs announced were the Investor Catalyst Hub to be based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and a Stakeholder and Operation Hub to be located in Washington, D.C. So think about that. I mean, two very iconic academia R&D locations, and then us. While Dallas Pegasus Park, a 26-acre life science and healthcare-focused business park, will be the physical focus of the customer experience hub, Fort Worth and other partner cities will be the key to the effort. A big part of why this was won was by Lida Hill Philanthropies. No funding amount have been announced for the project, but this, we're talking, can be a very big win for the area. The Agency for Health is a $2.5 billion effort created in the wake of the pandemic by the Biden administration last year and modeled after the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, the research and development arm of the Department of Defense. So this is why this is big. The agency is credited with helping inventing and popularizing technologies such as the internet. So really cool and unique stuff here. So I know I went through a lot of dense stuff, but hey, when we talk about big government and the nation moving, it's going to sound big and important. So anything on this first one?
No, it's really exciting. And we talked about this, EJ, right? Because it's a big story and means a lot, I think, for the North Texas regional community in terms of like the ecosystem that's being built in the life sciences arena, but it's also the result of a lot of work and actually by like some people that you've had on the pod.
Oh yeah.
And you know, I agree with one of our mutual friends. This would have been a great episode to have Hayden on.
Yep.
To let us know about how they built this. So first of all, like props to them, right, for doing the thing and having the vision. And the commitment to see this through, because this is a product of all of that hard work and collaboration.
North Texas total life science labor pool has increased by 17% since 2019, surpassing the average national growth of 13.7%. Research and development employment in life sciences in DFW has increased 44% since 2019 as well. So it's a booming area, like you said. UTA is also leading an effort funded in part by the Lida Hill Philanthropies to secure a federal contract for North Texas and Oklahoma to become a biomanufacturing hub. And now you're talking about tens of millions of dollars going to several different satellite institutions and bio kind of development business associations doing this work. So you're also seeing it in the education side and the economic side, which is kind of why me and you brought this story up. It's like, man, there's a lot of things moving that has been in the works for a decade, and now all the education institutions are here with it, and it seems like the investments in these things from a economic development side are matching it. Okay, now who gets to participate and who gets to enjoy the fruits of this labor and gets to enjoy this economic growth?
Yeah, we're seeing the halo. We're seeing the halo effect, right, of all of this like public investment. Really, that's what it's been, right? It's the city and like a lot of public universities, like we the people made this happen, and now who gets to benefit? And so I think a good way to frame that is a new article that we talked about briefly. So I think you know, who gets to benefit from this public investment. And I think there's another story that came out this week that really kind of speaks to that, or at least like interrogates that a little bit. And that's by Emily Wolfe from the Fort Worth Report. And Black families earn far less than white families in Fort Worth. What is the solution? And so Emily goes on to explain that households across Fort Worth of every race earned more money in 2022 than in years prior, according to data released by the U.S. Census Bureau. But income disparities between Black and white residents are worsening across the city. The median household income for Black residents in 2022 was about $40,000 lower than for white residents, according to the 2022 American Community Survey. In 2021, that gap was smaller at $36,774. And in 2020, that disparity was $35,665. So essentially, we've seen in 3 years a $5,000 increase in income disparity against our Black citizens and our white citizens, or residents, I should say, right? Christina Brooks, the director of the city's Diversity and Inclusion Department, says that she wants to focus on the positives, that incomes overall are rising. But we also want to see naturally like a closing of that gap. And to understand why the gap exists in the first place, you kind of have to look back at historically who had access to specific jobs that were paying at a higher rate. So white households in Fort Worth had a median income of $90,000 in 2022, and Black households had a median income of $50,000. And those income differences translate to poverty levels. So 7% of white residents in Fort Worth live below the federal poverty line, compared to like 19% of Black residents. Meanwhile, the median household income for Fort Worth at large is about $70,000. And I mean, it's hard. This is a hard story, right? Yeah. Because as much as I want to celebrate like all of the amazing work and all of the wins that we have accomplished, like as a city, right, from our leadership to our institutions, all the stakeholders, this is still a really hard number to grapple with. And I think like the hardest part of it is that the disparity is growing.
Yeah, and I think the fact that Texas A&M is on the other side of 35 and Lancaster and the homeless shelters are on the right on the other side is just a visual evolution of what happens over years. I do want to note here as well is that this is only talking about income. This isn't even talking about wealth. This is talking about our salaried jobs that we pay taxes on. And it's important to know that a lot of economic development people do income-based statistics because we actually don't have an organized way to check people's wealth. And like when Forbes 500 richest people is the best resource to like guess how much someone is worth is actually crazy to think about, because our incomes as normal people who have to be in the working class and not in the owner class, everything's down to microscope and you have to pay taxes on everything, but you don't get to see the value of wealth of these people as well, and what kind of loans they get approved for, and things like that. So like there is so much more that these numbers don't tell that creates the privileged ownership class that is on top of who knows what kind of assets are behind these incomes as well.
Yeah, you're not wrong. This is just like a little slice of the pie, right? But and that being said, like there is quite a lot of national data available that shows that Black and brown people have like less accumulated wealth than their white counterparts. So I don't think it would be a stretch to say that those numbers probably don't make up for the income disparities that we're seeing. And I think you hit the nail on the head. It's like a really poetic visualization of, wow, like look at all of these amazing things that are happening downtown, right? A&M, and then literally like across the tracks.
Literally.
Yeah, we have the homeless or the unhoused situation that is, spiraling because of this removal of public funds and support. And it's hard to reconcile the two. Yeah.
And I do want to like kind of, like I think the question, like the data around here that I think was important here is that it did say one income group. And I've been saying this for a hot minute. I said this to in a bipartisan forum that I got the privilege to be invited to here in Fort Worth. But the one group that made more money was the Asian household made more money than the white household. And one of my big, I'm in education, I do education stuff, and one of my big tidbits on life is that we have to be more thoughtful about what's happening and what is the Asian population going to do as they continue to thrive through the American dream, if it exists for anyone. And the reason why I say that is, Indian Asians are our fastest growing race in Texas. I mean, nationality in Texas. Asians are second to Hispanics, but the fastest growing is Indian Asian. And if you look at places like Frisco, where they have a 15-17% Indian Asian population, where Fort Worth has a 1%, the reason those things matter is because 75% of Indian Asian Americans have a graduate degree. Like 75, so they're getting high jobs. If you just took Indian Asian household income, it's probably 125, I would guess. If you ask me what was their average. So you're having an Indian, which is a brown experience. When we say Black and brown kids, there is brown kids thriving. It's not when we say Black and brown. So, and I say this to rural America, which you sent a great article as well on rural education, but our rural kids, our urban kids, our Black and brown kids, whatever, the American education system as a whole is losing to the kids who come over at university level. That's their first experience in American education. Those people are more likely to win the American dream than all of us who have to go through the American education system. Now, is it about the education system? I don't even know. I think it could be culturally, like how math and science is taken very serious in Asian communities. And so because we've become a high computed world, they've been able to make a lot more wealth. I think so much of what's going to happen is that what you've already experienced in Frisco, what you've already experienced in Colleyville, Plano, it's now going to come to Fort Worth. And I'm not saying none of this is bad. Like, I'm not saying it in a bad way, right? H Mart is now down the street. You're going to get a lot more. Cricket just started in Dallas. The first ever Major League Cricket in American history. It started in Dallas, Fort Worth. Tickets were sold out. So the scary part that I see is like when we're sitting here in 2060 and Panther Island's here and Texas A&M is thriving, you're going to see a lot of diversity and you're going to see a lot of new wealth created. it's just not currently, if we don't do something about it, going to be black kids from Stop 6 and Hispanic kids from the north side or the east side winning this unless we don't do something pretty serious to make sure those pathways are there. 81% of electrical engineers in graduate school come from overseas. So imagine taking your kid who wants to be an engineer at A&M, and you're not around white faces. You're around global faces. And you're the minority now in your country taking advantage of electrical engineering as a craft. And that is, to me, a big wake-up call that we have to prepare all of our American kids for. A life where that's like, there's people who are showcasing fruit and winning off of STEM and off of technology and off of participating in that. But for some reason, we're having a hard time executing that here in Fort Worth. You want to see an innovative city, look where the Asian population, the Indian population resides. And San Francisco, Frisco, we're 1.1%. We're not an innovation hub. I think that's going to change with all of this, but then that's going to marginalize our people who are here.
Yeah, you see really high indexes of like innovation and entrepreneurship and like highly diverse communities, particularly like communities with high levels of immigration.
Yeah.
And especially like
yeah, especially with your work that you do.
No, really, like we see it, right? Like especially like tech hubs, like high correlation with immigration and particularly like diaspora communities that come from like a secondary school level education and above. We don't really see that in Fort Worth yet, right?
Yeah.
Like and if we see it, we don't really talk about it, I don't think, which is like a whole nother conversation that I think we could get into, because that to me is very wild. Like I've seen some of the numbers and the fact that we as a city, and I don't mean that just in politics, but just in general culturally, aren't doing more to like recognize newcomers in our community and to include them more, to me is very strange when you look at the numbers. But going back to where we are about our communities now, and do they get to participate in the fruits of these wins? It doesn't really seem like we've been very good at setting them up for success. And like the article pointed out, like, yes, these are inequities that have taken, decades, if not centuries, to happen, right? Like inequities that are entrenched, and we're seeing a product of that. But just like we can spend decades building a biotech infrastructure, like why aren't we doing more work to make sure that our neighbors and like our kids get a chance to compete in that global space?
Yeah, and so the education side of like the immigration experience, I always say also to educators who do like policy or admin work, is like, we get so obsessed with making first generation college kids, but we don't teach people how to be first generation wealth builders. So like, okay, you go to college, you get your white collar job, but then what to do once you do that is like a whole thing that black and brown kids, even if they get through the pipeline, it's like that experience is also vitally important. But I think something that I've heard from immigrants or first generation wealth builders is that they learn as they get more successful that they're actually operating on the white stack of success, right? It's like, oh, I need to go to college. I need to live in a gated community. I need to learn how to golf because that's where all the rich people go. I need to join the country club because that's where, I need to join that fancy fitness place because that's where all the successful people is. And so they realize, like, you eventually wake up, if you're lucky, saying, holy smokes, my family gave me all this, leave all of who we were to go win this game. And I'm winning this game, but on a stack that I don't have to lose like myself, and I can actually become successful without jumping the white stack. And I think that's going to be the political move of what happens to how immigrants vote as we mature and become more of a melting pot of a country. Today, Asians are 2-1 Biden Trump in the last election. What does that look like as we continue to go? And are we going to be like we see the old white Texas man and saying that's success, that's rich, that's who I want to be, that's who I'm aspiring to be, but then we learn the nuances of their culture to then get up and win that, and then start losing a lot of who we are. And I think that is something like the immigrant complex or the first generation wealth complex, like holy crap, I am successful, but what am I successful at? I'm starting to look like something that I'm missing everything that I thought I was, but y'all position that as bad. And now you go to education and you talk about vouchers and you talk about keeping the white kind of culture and schooling, because now you got to teach these kids how to live like a American white establishment. And so it's just all eerie, very eerie. I think the whole DEI thing in higher education was a part of the initiative to get more Asian people to like the Republican side, because they were ones experience. Oh yeah, being Asian in college, you don't get diversity. So I think they were doing that. To pull, they see those numbers coming. They see that by 2060, Asians are going to pass blacks as the highest, next biggest minority population. And so Texas as a whole, we are like collided by obviously being Mexico and the border, and then also just an access to the Gulf Coast and just Latin America. But then with the Asian boom, Texas is going to be predominantly one, multiracial, but how do we navigate just the black and brown experience? We got to start talking about the other black and brown experience of kids, because it's here, and they don't spend enough time with the other black and brown kids, and that's something we got to do.
No, you're not wrong, right? We keep thinking about this like kind of in a binary, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it's a lot more complex than that. Yeah. And I've been really, really privileged to work for a global company and to have global colleagues and to work with global communities. And the world is a really, really big place in a way that growing up in Fort Worth doesn't always prepare you for. Oh, yeah. Even growing up here, like it's always felt like very culturally segregated, just like a wide disparity between what reality was like growing up on the east side in Stop 6. Yeah. And I had the privilege to go to a private school through my parents' really, really hard work. Yeah. And that was completely different, right? Didn't look like me. They had a lot more money than my family did, and their social lives were very, very different. And then when you add other things into the mix and other ways of being, that's really, really hard. And I will say this, we talk about immigration broadly, like generally, immigrants in North Texas are less likely to have bachelor's degrees or master's degrees broadly. But then depending on where they come from and what programs are being used to access the country, then that profile looks totally, totally different, right? And that's where we're seeing like a lot of like South Asian immigration coming from. And so like they are people that are entering our workforce that are prepared. And it's like, are we doing a good job of keeping up with global competitors, right? And I don't know that we are, EJ. I think like when I look at like my colleagues, like at my company and like the education that they have access to, the affordability and accessibility of like college education or like graduate degrees is very, very different than we have here. And as a mother of like 2 young children, it's like not only are there conversations to be had about inclusion and acceptance and assimilation and how we welcome other people into these spaces, but also like where are we in like the grand scheme of things, and where will these boys be? And that's hard to say as a parent, especially with some of the stories that have been coming out in public education, I think, this past year.
Yeah, no, the other thing that I think the Republican Party sees is, okay, the rise of the Asian American and who are, what they have a lot of wealth, good cash, they're going to be funding things, right? What they want to see in the community. I think the Republican Party sees them as how do we win, how they've been able to try to, win Latinos and blacks to the Republican Party. I think the Asian it's becoming a bigger strategy. The other thing with all this voucher stuff that everyone knows, I don't know if people know this part is, but the number one indicator of being a Democrat is a college degree. It's the number one indicator. I have this graph here. I will put it into the show notes, and it shows race, white, black, Latino, AAPI, and other. Then they have white, non-college, white, college. It shows you the 2012 election, 2016 election, the 2020 election, and then the difference of plus or minus in growth. And so when you look at the plus or minus here, is whites actually have grown more to vote Democrat since 2012 to 2020. So since 2016 to 2020 by 3%. Blacks are down a negative 3%. Latinos are down a negative 8%. We see that in Texas. Asian, AAPI, minus 1%. So relatively no change. Other, plus 2%. But then when you look at the degrees, white non-college, plus 1. White college, plus 4. So you went from 46% of the white college to now 54% from 2012 to 2020, 8 years. You nearly jumped, 1 of every 10 voter. And so what you're seeing happen is that there's no one for the immigrant or the working class. You're having the Republican Party being the wealth class, the wealth elites, and now you're having what I call, me and my wife, is the educated elites. We went to school, we did all this, and but my cousins who work at Walmart or Applebee's or construction, they look at me as the snooty, educated guy who got a degree, even though we're probably economically the same, but we don't relate. And so the politicians, I feel like the Democrats have become the elite class for the educated class, where the Republicans are. And so no one's doing anything for the working class right now. And so it's just all disbarred, it's just not even connected nowhere. There's no person, no party. And I think that's also why you have no one who cares about voting. They truly don't see them in elections. And then they don't see them in the curriculum of their education systems. And there's just a big gap of all this amazing talent in our society that they don't know they're that great. They don't know that they can actually go become the next big things in our society. We need them to, with all the great challenges they're going to face. Because we live in a society that currently wants to keep it how it is. And it's super disheartening. But I think that's why I look at this podcast. I only come home to, we do this on Sundays, and I've been being really hard on if I'm going to continue to do this, because it's hard on my life. I have a real job. I have a growing business that I work on a regular basis. I travel, and then I come home and then spend all my Sundays editing this pod every single week, because even though it's just I have to, as a person of color, as a person who's a first generation wealth builder, I feel like you have to continue to fight, and the fight's not over. And, we together, if we see hope and consistency, it gets more of us involved. I think there's been a rise in podcasts. There's a rise in conversations. I feel, the 817 podcast is done. But I don't know. So I just think about how do we get more of us to participate? I didn't read books when I was a kid. I didn't have my first salad until I went to a friend's house, and this is what his family was eating. I'm like, what is this green stuff? It's I was a super average kid in school, and just from hardworking parents. And now to see the world the way I get to have the privilege to, because I got a good education in college and got to experience stuff and got to be able to take a risk because my scholarships were paid for. I got the Bill Gates scholarship, full ride scholarship to go to school. So I had no debt, and I was able to bet on something. And now, I employ 20 people full time, and 180, 1099s, like I am an average kid in a North Side high school. That's the thing. I don't want it to be a story of success. It's actually just a story of, man, there's so many of these awesome kids like this all across our city. They just need to be exposed. They need to be funded. We need to really look at privilege. We really need to look at privilege. Like, how can you be mad at government welfare when white collar welfare is privilege? It's giving assistance to your kids through a family, and then getting mad at people who don't have those things, so the government assists them. And so if government assistance makes kids lazy, then you would have to say privilege makes kids lazy. So
I don't know if you're going to put this in the podcast, DJ, but I'm glad you brought this up. Immigration in Fort Worth is something that's like not really, really touched on. I saw that there was a panel, I think about 3 weeks ago, from the Dash Network that Mayor Maddie participated in, and it was talking about like, legal immigration, quote unquote legal. And it's like, yeah, that's nice. People are moving here, like, whether they're documented or undocumented, they're here. They're our neighbors. And we probably need to have like a broader leadership discussion about what that looks like. Because a lot of the times they're not coming from the same places that we did. And like having been in the experience where like we don't have the same background as people that grew up here, or like we're second or third generation, like that can be really like alienating. And for everyone, right? Like it was hard on me, and I'm sure like some of the kids in my class were like, why is this girl bringing in like a 2-liter bottle of Coke in her backpack? Like haven't her parents heard of a thermos? We should have that conversation. 2, I really hope you don't quit the podcast. Growing up here, I can tell you that I've always been a little resistant to the Fort Worth way, because the Fort Worth way tends to look a certain way, and it tended to look older, more conservative, more white. There were like boxes that I think had to be checked about like where they lived and what organizations they were involved with. Did they go to TCU or SMU, right? Didn't always ever feel like there was a place for someone like me in those conversations. And seeing you on the 817 podcast, like even for me as like a grown woman, was like, oh wow, like we can reshape the city. It can look a different way. It doesn't have to be cowboys and culture in the way it's been imagined in before. It can be different, and there's space for us here, and we can carve that space. So I know it takes a lot out on you. I hope that you're able to find a way, and I'm here to support you, to keep that conversation going and to help elevate other people into these spaces and to be part of this conversation. I don't think that there's enough of that. I feel like more often than not, when there are opportunities, look at it just like in the city, right? Like who's on the committees? Like, let's look at our committees and say, and look, like, I bet you there's probably at least like 2 or 3 people on like any committee or task force that's probably serving on like 2 or 3 more task forces or the same boards of like every organization.
Look at Leah King. I mean,
yes. Like, right? Like this person is like the executive director of this nonprofit, and they're also going to serve as like board chair of this nonprofit, and then they're going to be involved in politics. And again, like whoever it is, like we tend to not really dig hard to like mentor or support other people. And I don't think a lot of it is like ill-intended. I think it's just we're overextended sometimes, and it's just, that's easy. Let's put them in there. They know what they're doing. That needs to change, I think, for Fort Worth to be like what it could be, which I think is awesome. And then thirdly, like 100%, like one of the reasons that I love this podcast and its view, and why I love like you working with Anne, is that
Anne's gonna be so like mic dropped by all of this. By the way, she's like, I leave for 1 week and he's over here questioning his life.
Well, sometimes that happens, and we're human beings, and like we talk about these stories, like, and I laugh about them, and you sound like a flippant podcast host, or not you, but like I know I can, 'cause, with my vocal fry today. But like they bother me. They make me sad. Like I think about my parents, and like my mom died in the COVID pandemic. I think that was kind of like, not that I wasn't ever aware that there were real differences in like what we had access or opportunity to, but that like really drove it home. That it's like she checked all the boxes, right? She was older. She was immunocompromised. Like the job she worked in, right? Her income levels, her education levels, like she was a high risk person. And that, in that same period that she got sick, like, Mayor Betsy Price was sick, but Mayor Betsy Price had like access to like trial medication that my mom didn't. And a lot of people like her didn't. And so I think like that really kind of helped me process a lot of that. It's really grief, I think, like when you don't have access to things, and to bring it to like the focus. And now it's like, well, that was her life, but I have my life to live now, and I have my children to think of, and other people who are like me and have their children to think of. And I would really like to build a different world for them than the one that we have been building. And it has seemed like very capitalistic. Not that, I don't always agree with free enterprise. Like, sure, like there's a time for that, but I don't think that should be like this thing that leads the way every time. And I don't think it's the solution every time. And, we were talking about like traveling for work, and it's like, yes, like I grew up hustling, like, right? Like we grew up really poor. I know how to hustle. I know how to work hard. But it's like, I don't want to live like that anymore. And I don't want my kids to have to do that anymore. Like at some point, like hustle culture has to like scale back a little bit. And then when we look at like the challenges that are facing all of us now and what we're going to see, like really a time of upheaval, like if you're paying attention at all to climate data, we need to get with the program, and we need to come to the table and figure this out.
Yeah. And that is the as we close out the big story, which turned in kind of a full-on perspective of just us going through our brains navigating what to do. And there's a lot of you who probably listen to this feel this way. High anxiety, high stress, no solution, can't figure out, everything plays together, and you're like, what can I do? And I think what is going to be the biggest treasure, and the thing I'm most hopeful in the world, is as we become more technologically integrated, I think what the world, to me, I see is lacks meaning. Oh, nothing matters. There's no meaning. And I think there's tons of meaning for kids and for us and for our kids, because and unfortunately with hard consequences, bad things means we need superheroes. We need people to believe they can solve it. And so your kid, my kid, whoever's kids, like, we have to educate them and show them the real world that we're giving them. And we have to do it early. And we have to say, the people who are going to solve this is you. And if you believe that at 5, and you have parents supporting you to see that you matter and you can be great and you can achieve anything no matter what you look like, where you come from, that's to me, the only answer we have is how many people can we give meaning? Because that's what fuels me to do this podcast. It's really what fuels it. It matters. Staying consistent matters. Showing up for it matters. I think that's the big thing. And I will close this as we get to our wins and losses. I'm going to go into my win, but I'm also going to talk about it from a loss lens. There was an excellent interview with John Goff, one of our successful rich billionaires in Fort Worth, and someone I'm a really fan of, and I actually think is not too bad. He did a podcast on Innovate Fort Worth, but he talks about his story. He talks about his story of moving to Wedgwood in 1981. He was relatively a young 20-year-old, 30-year-old in Fort Worth, did right by John Goff. He became mentors with Rainwater. He ended up working as a client for the Bass family. He became, and he took a lot of risks, and he worked really hard, but he also grew up in a life where the Fort Worth way was also his culture. And I think that's the biggest gap that I think power and capitalism doesn't understand, is that I don't think I'm no less great than, all these kids who get to achieve stuff like John Goff. I just don't want to learn how to play golf. I just don't want to go hunting. I just don't want to go to your church. I just don't want to do those things. And so because of that, there's no way in hell I would ever be as financially successful as John Goff. This has nothing to do about John Goff as a person. It was an amazing story. And that guy did some crazy stuff to get to where he was going. It was extraordinary. But he was a white man who navigated a white space and had incredible networks through his hard work and the work that he chose to do as a person. And that is something we all going back to Eric Johnson as a black man and mayor, who you have to decide how much is power important to you and becoming successful, and how much is staying close to your cultural consciousness. And you see people get lost. I think you see it with like a Kanye West. You see it with people who just, you start out raw and like there for the people, but then you can start having to start asking yourself questions. And now you're like, who am I? I'm really powerful. I'm influenced. And now I'm advocating for a world and a perspective that wasn't made for people like me. And now you're freaking out. And so it's a journey. And thank you for having me on this pod, because I don't know, me and Ann would have got into the, Ann would have, me and her can go into the details of the work here in Fort Worth. But I think I needed let's just riff about life and, how hard it is for us to navigate it.
There has to be room for both, right? Like, I love policy discussions, and it's like, what is this tax budget item going to, and how are we fundraising this? But also, like, just to take a step back and be like, oh, we're going through some things like as individuals, and it's okay to make room for that, and that's what makes it different. And I think that's good.
Yeah. Well, I know. So my win was the John Golf Innovate Fort Worth pod. My loss actually is, I'm going to do that one really quick because I know we're way over time. But my loss, I know I had one up here that we'll just save for later. That could be a loss for later. Is, I don't know if you saw this, but Elon Musk just came out with a book. Walter Isaacson did a book on Elon Musk. Supposedly, there's a story in the book about why he chose Austin over Dallas. And the answer was Dallas was too Texas for us. And it made me realize what, in that voice, it's all about cowboy culture, that you're trying to recruit these very rich people like Elon, jumping hoops to make them like you, and they making decisions, and even them don't want your cowboy culture. And so I guess that's actually a win, is that cowboy culture doesn't get you people to come and say your city is awesome, because Elon literally did not choose North Texas because we are a bunch of cowboy-loving weirdos. So that's a win. So where's your wins and losses?
My wins are, they're a little muted today. So there was an article about the ongoing issue with the downtown library. As you know, the Central Library building has been sold. Library focuses are going to be more of like a neighborhood branch for downtown. And, people are upset about it naturally. And Mayor Maddie said that, the city does need marquee projects. And so while it's a very guarded win, I am glad to hear someone say that the city does need marquee projects in the public sphere, or, for example, support for local arts. I haven't seen that in the budget yet, but I'm hopeful, and I'll take that as a win. And then my loss is my old school, Nolan Catholic High School. So again, I grew up to the east side. My parents were immigrants. We grew up very, very modestly, and they both worked like 4 jobs to send us to this like very expensive school on the east side. And I enjoyed my time there. I had some great mentors. I had some rough times too. But generally, like I loved what I learned there. And I found out that they rescinded an award for an alumni who is an Episcopalian minister and supports LGBTQ plus rights. For those of you who don't know, Nolan Catholic is, of course, a Catholic school. They were recently in the news this past year for hosting Governor Abbott in regard to the school voucher program. And I'm a little disappointed with them because those aren't necessarily the values that I learned from them. And I'm sad to see them move in this way.
Yeah, I can imagine. And that's, the Nolan Catholic pivot. Yeah, I would love to sit down with you just an hour just talking about going to private school as a Latinx person who came from immigrant, story, and just all that stuff. Just like it'd be great to now see you now and think of how do you think of that experience, and then now that you have a young kids, maybe we just have you back on the pod, and that's what we just riff about and do that, because we already went through an agenda that we went way off topic, but hopefully through hearing just, I think, authenticity and the transparency of the 817 pod, it either keeps you fired up to keep listening, and also you eating your vegetables and listening to us even when it's not the funnest topic, but it's the work we got to do. So any last minute things you would like to say?
No, I just hope I know that we're all working really hard, and things seem very hard sometimes. Just make sure that you take a moment to rest, and it's okay to just be like, I'm tired, and I'm not on task, and that's all right.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, by the way, people, with the recent couple pods, I've had technical errors. The sound has been off. And it's literally time, and I'm making mistakes that I usually don't, and that's the ultimate reason why I was thinking about, man, should I be doing this pod? And I've thought a lot of crazy stuff, and I'm saying stuff I haven't even talked to Ann about. I mean, even just maybe, because Ann's great. Ann is awesome, and she's on top of the pod. But maybe just having someone else be my side, and Ann does it and I'm still support it, and fund the studio and fund whatever. Like, I still am there. Maybe it's my time to let go the front side of it. I've thought about that, and but yeah, it's just what keeps me going is, I don't want to sacrifice the quality and waste people's time, because a rushed show doesn't do anybody service. If I didn't do an honest reading that week, if I didn't do an honest, understanding of the topics, I'm okay if I do that a couple times, every now and then. But I don't want to not be a high quality host that knows what he's talking about and saying stuff without really doing the work. That's really the reason. I always thought about that.
I think that's fair, EJ. I think that's fair. But it's also okay to say hey, I need more support, because I still think that I think it's important to have you be a face of this. Yeah. I do but sometimes we just need a little bit of help, and that's all right.
So that's the 817 podcast. If you've made it this far, you guys are awesome. We will see you next week. Next week, we're going to have Twyla Masterson with Leadership ISD, and she is thebomb.com. We'll be talking about this, so you're more than welcome to come back on next week if you're open. And we're just going to riff about school boards, North Texas, education, public school, all this kind of stuff, but with someone who just knows how to do it and talk it. I'm always blown away when I meet Twyla or in a room with Twyla. So the fact that we get to have her on the 817 podcast for an hour is going to be really good.
Absolutely. And when we talk about who has access to all the amazing opportunities that are happening in Fort Worth, education is probably the biggest piece of that, right? Yeah. And we're seeing a lot of disinvestment from that space. There was a story in the news this week about how enrollment is down, and Fort Worth ISD will look to quote unquote right size, which is really downsize, due to affordability issues and charter school competition. It's time to take a deep dive. I know that the voucher special session is just right around the corner. Again, something really to keep an eye on, and a really, really timely discussion, and I'm really grateful for it.
Love it. Awesome. Well, you guys have a great one, and we'll talk to you guys later.